Good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing about the principles of modern linguistics. Now let's move on the structuralism. Structuralism is a term used in linguistics referring to a theoretical approach to the analysis of language that describe linguistic items in terms of structure. The basic claim of structuralism is that language is a structured system. Ferdinand de Saussure is known as the father of structuralism. In 1916, his course De Linguistique Generale was published, where the main ideas of structuralism were formulated. He argued that each element in a language is defined by how it is related to other elements. He also formulated several principles of linguistic analysis, which have become the tenets of modern linguistics. Meaning, structuralism suggests that there is a specific structure or framework that makes up the total concept. So, the structuralist approach implies that in order for anyone to fully understand the concept, such as linguistic, they first must understand the subsets and how these fit into the overarching structure. Additionally, an important factor in the structuralist approach is understanding that these subsets all fit and work together collaboratively. An example of structuralism is describing an apple. An apple is crisp, sweet, juicy, round, and hard. Another example of structuralism is describing your experience at the ocean by saying it is windy, salty, and cold, but rejuvenating. Therefore, structuralism is about choice of words and focuses more on structures that come up with one concept. To sum it up, the structures are the words, phrases, and how they are used to generate an ideas.
Linguistics is descriptive, not prescriptive. It means that linguists describe the rules and facts of language exactly as they find them without making judgments. They do not try to impose norms of correctness and do not try to change the actual usage of the language of the native speakers. This contrasts with the previous view of traditional grammar, which was very strongly prescriptive. The principle of descriptiveness also reflects the present day view about language change. Before this Saussure, it was held that linguistic change involves corruption and should be stopped. Modern linguistics state that change is a natural process. The task of the linguist is to describe the way people speak and write, not to tell them how they ought to use language. Linguistic is descriptive, not prescriptive, because language is constantly changing and linguists study how actual language is used, structured, etc. While there are many prescriptive rules for writing and speaking, native speakers regularly break the rules and are still understood. For a linguist, it doesn't matter how a speaker regularly break the rules and are still understood. For a linguist, it doesn't matter how a speaker should say something. It matters how they do actually use language. Example, I ain't going is used all the time by many English speakers and readily understood by the same. Many people associate knowing a language with speaking and writing it according to the grammatical rules established for that language in grammar books and dictionaries. The study of linguistic competence does not include the study of prescriptive standards that claim that one sentence rather than another is correct. Instead, linguists are interested in what speakers of language actually say and what they accept as possible in the language, regardless of whether the construction matches the grammar rules posited by the grammar police. This approach to grammar is descriptive rather than prescriptive. Descriptive grammar is what speakers say and when, why, and how they say it, and not whether they should or shouldn't say it. Linguists concern themselves with discovering what speakers know about a language and describing that knowledge objectively. They devise rules of descriptive grammar. For instance, a linguist describing English might formulate rules such as this. Number one, some English speakers end a sentence with a preposition. Example, who do you want to speak to? Number 2, some English speaker use double negatives for negation. Example, I don't have nothing. Number 3, adjectives precedes the nouns. They modifies. Example, red book, nice guy. To form the plural of a noun, add s. Number 1 room, 2 rooms. 1 book, 2 books. Number 5, the vowel sound in the word suit is produced by a rounded lips.
Let us now move on to the priority of the spoken language. It is one of the main principles of modern linguistics that spoken language is more basic than written language. For a long time, only written language was studied and judgment about language on the whole were based on the result of these studies. We all know that spoken language comes first before we learn the written ones. Speech existed long before any writing for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. There are still languages that have no writing system, and a lot of them are only written because of missionary Bible translators. And while there are plenty of languages without writing, there are no written languages that originated without spoken language first. Only this means that long time ago, speech or spoken language is considered as basic rather than the written ones. Well, it's because speech is concise regardless of grammatical composition and on how it is constructed compared to a written ones that rules and regulations are being applied. For example, when you are talking to your best friend, you can use simple and uniform sentences even though it is not grammatically correct. Despite its composition, your friend can still understand what you are trying to say. But if you are going to create a journals and magazines, you should always be careful on the grammar and composition because the readers can easily analyze the errors ever since written language is being studied. However, spoken language is very different from written text. There are great variations both in grammar and vocabulary choices, which the written language does not reflect. As the world evolves long time ago, linguists find and discovered more on their studies. Finding shows that speech should also be following correct grammar and vocabulary choices. Since judgment on the composition can easily detect ever since it was deliberated, judgment on the speaker can also be easily done unlike to our written ones that you only make judgment if you choose to read it. Therefore, for a full understanding of language use, both spoken and written language should be studied. The following chart shows the differences of spoken and written language respectively. Spoken language involves speaking and listening skills. It also it is also older than written language. It is more informal and simple than written language. It is mostly used between two people who are in the same place. It can use tone, pitch, volume, and etc. It is temporary since there are no records. And lastly, spoken language contains repetition, incomplete sentences, interruptions, corrections, and etc. On the other hand, written language involves reading and writing skills. It is not as old as the spoken language. It is more formal and complex than spoken language. It promotes communication across space and time. It can use heading, punctuation, layouts, and etc. Permanent since there are records, and lastly, written language often grammatically correct and may contain long sentences in complex tenses.
Synchronic and diachronic description of language. Two basic principles can be applied to the study of language: synchronic and diachronic. Diachronic linguistics is the study of languages from the viewpoint of their historical development. Synchronic linguistics studies languages at a single point of time. It may be the present day situation or any given period in the history of language development. Both ways of describing languages are important. Synchronic linguistics and diachronic linguistics are two main divisions of linguistics. The Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure introduced these two branches of linguistics in his course in general linguistics in the year of 1916. Overall, synchrony and diachrony refer to a language state and to an evolutionary phase of language. So, in synchronic linguistics, which is also called a descriptive linguistics, is the study of language at any given point in time, usually at present. So, this point in time may be specific time in past. Synchronistic views look at a language as if it's static and not changing. This branch of linguistics attempts to study the function of language without any reference or without looking to earlier or later stages. This field analyzes and describes how language is actually used by a group of people in a speech community. It also involves analyzing grammar, classification, and arrangement of the features of a language. On the other hand, diachronic linguistics basically refers to the study of language through different periods in history. Thus, it studies the historical development of language through different periods of time. This branch of linguistics' main concerns of diachronic linguistics are as follows. Number one, describing and accounting for observed changes in particular languages. Number two, reconstructing the prehistory of languages and determining their connection, grouping them into language families, developing general theories about how and why language changes. Number three, describing the history of speech communities. And the last, number four, studying the history of words. Comparative and etymology are the two main subfields of diachronic linguistics. The first looks at a snapshot of a language and the other studies its evolution, like a frame of film versus a movie. For example, analyzing the word order in a sentence in Old English only would be a study in synchronistic or synchronic linguistics because in synchronic linguistics, it studies language at a particular period or time. If you look at how word order changed in a sentence from Old English to Middle English and now to Modern English, that would be a diachronic study because in diachronic studies or linguistics, it deals with development of language over time. Like in my example earlier, it studies how language evolved from Old English to Middle English and now to Modern English.
All languages are equal. For all linguists, all languages serve as the data for objective study. It was common earlier to call certain languages primitive. Every existing natural language was determined a highly developed system and its structure does not directly correlate with the stage of social development of that speech community. As stated in the definition of languages are equal, all languages are said to have the same importance, regardless of what kind of society, community, or country they belong. It must be treated equally because all of them gives the people the right to communicate, connect, and of course, to live. Like for example, language of ethnic groups in the Philippines like Aita or Ita. Most of Filipinos do not understand how they talk, but still, they are considered Filipinos. Therefore, their language is considered to be vital on how other people can identify the community they belong to. In fact, the Philippines has over 120 languages spoken, and that makes the country unique and valuable. Some of them doesn't know how to speak in Tagalog, but doesn't mean that their language is useless. Come to think of it, if they do not know how to speak in Tagalog, some of us will disrespect them and their language, and same goes with us. We do not know how to speak their language, so they can disrespect us and our language. That is the principle of the equality of languages.
Lastly, the paradigmatic and syntagmatic relations of linguistic units. Linguistic unit enters into relations of two different kinds which identify in the language system. Syntax and paradigms explain with how signs or words relate to each other. So, what is paradigmatic relations? It enters into paradigmatic relations with all the other elements of the same level which can also be used in the same context. For example, in the phrase, a blank of milk, the missing element could be glass, jar, mug, or bottle. All these concrete countable nouns stand in paradigmatic relations. And with that, the phrase could be a glass of milk, a jar of milk, a mug of milk, or a bottle of milk. Therefore, paradigmatic relationships are simply about substitution or choice of words. However, a linguistic enters into syntagmatic relations with the other elements of the same level with which it occurs and which make its context. Syntagmatic relations for the phrase a glass of milk would be between glass and a and of and milk. In that case, syntagmatic relationships are about positioning. To further understand, the difference between syntagmatic relations and paradigmatic relations is that a syntagmatic relationship involves a sequence of signs that together create meaning. A paradigmatic relationship involves signs that can replace each other, usually changing the meaning with a substitution. The words in a sentence are all symptoms, and together they form a syntagmatic relationship that creates meaning. If you change the order of symptoms in a sentence, it can change the meaning significantly. For example, John ate an octopus. An octopus ate John. Two sentences using the exact same words are symptoms, but very different meanings because the order or the syntagmatic relationship of the words changed. Sticking with John and his dinner, John might have chosen a variety of things to eat beside octopus. He might have chosen beef, eggplant, chicken, or pasta for his meal. Each is part of a paradigm of foods or specifically foods John might eat. The items in a paradigm share some kind of functions, and the paradigm is the set of category they belong to. Syntagmatic and paradigmatic relations can be seen as different dimensions of a sign, and they're often shown that way as the following table. The cow jumped over the moon. That dog walked around my yard. This cat slept under my bed. Our hamster ran inside its wheel. Their bird flew through our window. Pat's fish swam in a fishbowl. The syntagmatic relationships is seen along the horizontal axis and the paradigmatic relationship is seen along the vertical axis. Start at any row and read across for the syntagmatic relationship. Look up and down any column for the paradigmatic relationship. For example, the cow jumped over the moon. Syntagmatic. Together form one meaning. But you could replace cow with another word in the column, paradigmatic, to form a different sentence with different meaning, such as the fish jumped over the moon, or the dog jumped over the moon, or it could either be the hamster jumped over the moon. The second principle of modern linguistics is the functionalism, the Prague School. Functionalism in linguistics is best seen as a movement continuing the tradition of Saussurean structuralism. The main claim of this approach is that language is a system of functionally related units. Functionalism is represented mostly by the works of the Prague School, established in 1926 with the main representatives Willem Mathesius, with its most prominent members the Russian linguist Nikolai Trubetskoy and the Russian-born American linguist Roman Jakobson. The Prague School also emphasized the distinction between the phonetic and the phonological analysis of sounds, introducing the notions of phoneme and distinctive feature. Of particular importance is also their formulation of the theory of functional sentence of perspective, or the FSP, a theory that analyzes utterances in terms of the information they express. The phonological, grammatical, and semantic structures of a language are determined by the functions that they have to perform. The main function of language are communicative function, where language is used by people to communicate. The starting point for functionalists is the view that language is first and foremost an instrument for communication between human beings. And what we're having right now is a form of communicative function. I am the speaker, and so that you are listening. We're having a connection or communication. Another example of it is having a conversation with your mother. By talking to her with the use of words, you are able to communicate with each other. Language also has the expressive function. It is to convey the speaker's feelings and attitudes. Of course, when we're talking to someone, we don't just speak. We also put emotions or expressions. And language is not just about words or phrases. We all know that language comes in verbal and nonverbal, so that it also uses body languages and gestures. Third is the phatic function, which was introduced by Bronisław Malinowski, who's claiming that language is often used for maintaining social relations. In speech communication, the term means small talk. The best example for this are greetings, such as hello, how are you, good afternoon, good day, have a nice day, and etc. Last but not the least is the generativism, or the generative grammar. The term is used to refer to the theory of language developed by Noam Chomsky. His language theory revolutionized linguistics in 1957, when his book Syntactic Structures was published. He draws a distinction between linguistic competence and performance. A speaker's linguistic competence is that part of knowledge of the native language system which enables him to make an infinite number of sentences. Performance is linguistic behavior which is determined both by the speaker's linguistic competence and various non-linguistic factors, such as social conventional, emotional attitudes, and etc. Chomsky claims that human language is innate. A child is born with a biological predisposition to learn language. This feature is species specific, that is, it discriminates humans and other living creatures. On the whole, he emphasized the role of language as a basic means to investigate the human mind. We have here a Venn diagram showing the differences and similarities of linguistic competence and performance. Let us start with the similarities. Both are used as ways of communication with the use of language and words, so that they are both concerning language. Also, they are both proposed by Noam Chomsky as a generative grammar. Let us now move on to their differences. Linguistic performance is the actual use of language in concrete situations. It is the ability to produce and comprehend sentences in a language. This is the way a language system is used in communication. Lastly, it is the study of the system of rules. Performance is the study of actual sentences themselves, of the actual use of the language in real-life situations. Linguistic competence, on the other hand, are a set of skills, knowledge, and attitudes that are interrelated and mutually supported in order to conduct a successful scientific communication. It is the unconscious knowledge of languages and is similar in some ways to Ferdinand de Saussure's concept of language, The Organizing Principles of a Language by Noam Chomsky. Here are the key points of the whole topic. That would be all, and thank you.